I am kneeling in the back of this New York taxi cab in the middle of the night, and we're going through the Battery Tunnel, and my water breaks because I'm in labor in a taxi cab. And after a while, I tell my husband, I'm like, I think I'm having the baby. He does not believe me, but he checks, and he reaches down and touches the top of his new daughter's head. Now, our cab driver did not speak any English, but luckily we knew this word. And he's like, cabeza, cabeza. And the cab driver's like, cabeza, cabeza. And he just starts running the red lights. So earlier that night, I was going into labor, and like any good Mormon wife, I was focused on my physical appearance. And so I was like blow drying my hair, having a contraction, putting on makeup, having a contraction, trying to get ready to go to the hospital. And it seems to be escalating. Now we call the midwife and she's like, you're a new mom. It's your first time. We talked about this. It's going to be like 24 hours of labor. Don't go to the hospital too early. She's like, call me back if contractions get a lot closer together. And they do. We call her back and she looks at how close the contractions are and she's like, you need to call a cab right now. I will meet you at the hospital. So my husband calls a cab and I have this horrible task in front of me because my body has taken over. I'm making these incredibly loud primal sounds for all of our neighbors to hear in the middle of the night. And because I'm a Mormon, I wear special underwear that goes all the way down to my knees and covers my shoulders, and I'm not supposed to show it to anybody. So between now and when the cab gets there, I have to get dressed while I'm in labor. So I'm like having a contraction, one leg in shorts, having another contraction, another leg in, and it's absolutely miserable. I make it down all of the flights of stairs. We catch the cab and we're on our way to the hospital. So now I'm waddling into the hospital literally with a baby's head between my legs, and we get to the elevator, and kid you not, there are people that aren't noticing that I'm in labor, and they're getting on the elevator and pushing buttons before our floor. So it's like ding, open, and then on the way out they notice and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Now I'm on the hospital bed, I'm kneeling there, and the midwife isn't there yet, and so the nurse is like, don't push. This took every ounce of any self-control or discipline that I've ever had to try to get my body to not push when I'm in labor. Finally, the midwife walks in. She's like, hello, hello. I'm like, can I push now? They're like, oh yeah, go ahead and push. They still think it's going to be a while. One push, boom, the head is out. And the searing pain of my flesh ripping open. I've got one more push, now the baby's all the way out. 2 pushes and that baby was here. I am suddenly flooded with this incredible emotion, more powerful than I've ever felt in my entire life. And what I felt was power. I was so incredibly powerful. If a bear would have walked in, I would have not hesitated to fight that bear and I would have won. It was such a massive feeling. Everything else faded away and I was just in this phenomenal power. And then it was interrupted by a squirmy purple thing being put on my chest. And I was like, oh, that's right, I just had a baby. The nurses are telling me I need to take my shirt off so they're skin to skin. And as a Mormon woman, I'm really self-conscious about that because outside of my husband, nobody's ever seen me with my shirt off. But I'm like, okay, yeah, that's right. I just had a baby. So, okay, skin to skin. I have this little stranger and I feel no connection to this squirmy little creature, this little veiny purple, like, I don't know you. This is a complete stranger to me. So next, they're sewing me up. And my midwife is just crying and crying because the hospital is closing down. It went bankrupt and it was like we were the last people in there. So all of these people were stopping by the room with my legs up in the air being sewn. And they're like, oh, it's so sad, it's closing. And she'll like stop what she's doing and put down her stuff and go and give them a hug. And it's like, oh, it's so sad. I'm going to full emotional labor mode. I'm like, oh, that's really rough that the hospital's closing down. Like, do you feel like you're okay to sew me up right now? And she's like, it's just so hard to see through all the tears. As we're leaving the hospital the next morning, they're putting chains around the hospital doors. Like that hospital is over. And as soon as I get home, I feel like something's wrong. I feel like I have a fever and I'm feeling really off and strange and sort of allergic to something and tingly. And so we call the nurse hotline and they're like, honey, it's just your milk coming in. Like, don't worry about it. All these symptoms are normal. So I'm like, okay, this is all normal. My skin is really like red, hot to the touch. I'm so freezing cold. I've got like all of these blankets on top of me. I just can't get warm enough. And I look in the mirror and I notice that all the skin on my eyelids has just started peeling off in big chunks. Like I've had like this horrible sunburn. So I call her back. I'm like, is this a symptom of your milk coming in? She's like, no, go to the hospital. They're wheeling me into the hospital and I first notice all the police. And then I notice that everyone in a hospital bed is handcuffed to their hospital bed. And I'm like, what's going on? Turns out I went on the same day as like prison checkup day. And so I was the only like non-prisoner in that room. So they see the symptoms, they rush me to the ICU. My heart is just like, they're calling it hummingbird heart, right? It's just off the charts, going so fast. I'm like boiling inside, like my temperature is really, really high. They're rushing me to all of these tests. They've got IVs in both arms, just pumping me through, like pumping me up with like antibiotics and fluids and all of this stuff, trying to figure out what's wrong. And I am so fixated on keeping my milk. I'm so worried about losing my milk. And so I'm trying to bend my arms as much as I can with IVs going in both so that I can pump my milk at the same time as I'm hooked up to all these machines because I so badly wanted to be able to breastfeed. And in walks my doctor. And like, I am so grateful to her, like to this day, because she saw how hard I was trying. And she just looked at me and she's like, you know, I was formula fed and I'm okay. And that kindness just meant everything. And huge shout out to the Spackmans who were babysitting our 4-day-old daughter while I was in the hospital. Apparently the sanitation in the last few days at the other hospital wasn't up to par with them going bankrupt, and so I caught a virus there and I just had to wait it out in the hospital while the virus moved through. And then I went home to this little creature that just needed so much and slept so much, and I was so exhausted and I was wounded and I was sick, and she had spent more time with our neighbors than she had with me in her whole life. And I didn't feel a connection to her. I love her with like the power of 1,000 suns. Like, I love her. But I needed to get to know her. She was a stranger to me. And although I have such a love for her now, it wasn't natural. Like, it didn't start out that way. I was never able to nurse. The virus dried up all of my milk. I did everything. And the reason that I'm telling this story in its real rawness is because I think it's important for women to share their real stories, because none of us are wrong and all of us are different. And when we're trying so hard to create this like fairy tale expectation of how having a baby should go or how being a mom should feel like, then comparing stories and thinking that there's some right way is just bad for everyone. And the other important point here is I do not think that I would have ripped, and I would have gotten to the hospital before my baby started crowning, and I would have gone back to the hospital before my virus was peeling my skin off if people had believed me. Believe women, especially when it comes to their own bodies. We must do anything necessary for women to have autonomy over their own bodies. And that starts with believing women. And here's my girl now who was almost born in a New York taxi cab.